Hey, what's going on, guys? Today in this episode, we'll just talk about on BTP authentication and authorization, and this time with client versus human user. So, if you can recall the last episode, the card that is coming over here on the screen. So there we'll just explain like how we can create an API provider app where we have protected that all the routes of this Node.js application using Passport as a middleware. And he also added an app router to access those protected routes. And in that project, we added the XSUAA service for the both app router as well as API provider. Generally, API provider should not have an app router link to, right? It's just an API provider. Whoever wants to call that endpoint, they can just call it, right? So let's think about to take out this app router or this project, and something similar will be able to achieve. So this is my API provider, thus XSUAA is added, but we'll be creating a separate project and I'm calling it as a human user. And there I'll just add the app router, but we'll link the same XSUAA service with this app router. So nothing much difference with the above one, only thing is the two different projects I'll just create. I will just see how it works. Now let's take another use case where I'll just create a dedicated XSUAA service for that human user app, and I'll not use the API provider XSUAA service in that case. So to explicitly independent, you can say kind of an security objects that I'll be attaching to, and then we'll see like whether this app router through the human user can access this API endpoints, which is already protected with the roles as well as the the authentication with the JWT token, right? Because it's the OAuth token protected. The third scenario is also interesting because in that case, no more a human user will be accessing this API endpoints, but it will be a client application because the basic difference with these two is with the human app, you will get a login credential screen where user can add the login details, user and password, to access the API endpoint. But in that case of client app, there is no such human interaction, so obviously no kind of login screen you will find. So the client app itself within this application has to generate the authentication token to access this app router, I mean to say, sorry, API provider endpoints. So in that case, whether it will be able to access it or not, and what are the things that we need to do from security endpoints to ensure in both the cases it all works fine, and what are the different challenges that we'll encounter, that we'll see. So that's overall the agenda. Hopefully it will be helpful to you, so stay tuned till the end. Now to save certain times, I just created certain projects already for you. So I have cloned this particular project and then I created a new branch out of, and I'm calling it as a btp-auth-human-client. So in this particular branch, I have just added two folders, right? So that means this kind of a scenario I'm trying to achieve. So this folder doesn't have any app router, whereas the human app folder does have the app router, right? So that's the similarity you can say with this particular use case, right? With a human app connecting with the API provider. So now let's see quickly what exactly this project contains. So here the same concept. I'm not explaining much in detail, but just to call out, it has two routes. One is the main route or home route, where it can just say sometimes welcome message. And if you go for a get data route, then it says basically successfully reached API endpoint. But here one thing to notice, we have added something called a check scope, which is a middleware, and it's a local middleware created as a function, and it says, or rather it checks something local scope, which is dedicatedly called a provider scope. So that scope, it just looks or validate if the token that whoever calling this API endpoint, the token that it passed through should have this provider scope. If it is, then only it will send this message. Otherwise, it will just go for a forbidden message, right? So that is what the this particular API provider does. It's a very simple one. Like all other passport protection and all, I already explained in the previous episode, which I have given the link in the description box below, so you can check that if you want to. All right, so now come back to this security level, because this API provider has its own scope, role templates, and role collections. and I have given the name of the scope as a provider scope, which I'm validating over here in this check local scope middleware function, as you can see over here, right? So that is the role that I'm telling, like whoever wants to have this endpoint to connect, make sure that that user has this particular role assigned. All right, all good. So, and this particular security JSON I have used to create an XSUAA service, and that I have linked to with this particular application called API provider that you can see over here in the manifest.yml, because I have added this particular service, which is an XSUAA for this provider, which actually been created using this XS security file, right? So that all we have created, and this application I already deployed to cloud also. Okay, fine. So that means in the BTP cloud, if I go, I'll be able to see this API provider app. So let's quickly check this out if we can see this or not. So this is my trial account. Let's go to dev. So as I said, the provider app is already loaded and it's up and running. So if I just go over here, no worries how to deploy the application to cloud if you are not aware of. In case this video tutorial also will talk about the later section. I just wanted to speed up the discussion. That's the reason I just created certain apps already for you, and then follow on use cases I'll create from scratch, so you can able to follow along. Fine. So this provider app, if I just go, and it will basically call the first endpoint, which is the root endpoint, but I was supposed to expect this message, kind of a welcome to this API, but I'm basically receiving unauthorized, because as I said, it's actually protected, so no one can access the any of the root. So also for the validation, let's check the other route, how it works. Same thing, unauthorized, right? Both are actually protected. All right. Now as I said, this particular API I'm planning to access through a separate human user, which will only have the app router, but it will attach the same XSUAA authentication service. So let's see how it actually designed. So this is my human app, same XSUAA as the project name. Within you can find the app router. Now if you go to manifest.yml, you can see the same API XSUAA provider service is actually linked to. All right, so if I go to the app router, it doesn't have anything much, only two things to follow. Like the moment I'll call, it will basically trigger this app router chase from the node module, which I already added as a dependency. And also I have created a route called xsap.json, and I'm telling, like, if I just create something as API, put certain APIs and word on the URL of this human app, it will eventually go to this destination, and this destination you can find it over here. So it's a user created destination or custom based destination, so that I have just added in the manifest.yml directly. So it will basically call the provider app, right? And most important is this for token true, so that what are the token being generated out of this human app login credential, the same token will be passed to the next app, which is the API provider app, right? So if I just deploy this code to cloud BTP, then we'll see like how this particular human app can access with a API provider. So let's check this out. So currently I'm in the folder same XSUAA, which is in this one. So my manifest, let's see if my manifest is already showing in this router. Yes, it is. Second. Yes, it is. It's showing manifest. So I can just put cf push, and it will just deploy the code entirely to the BTP cloud. Make sure you are already logged in to the command line interface tool through that's a CF login, and if it asks for the API endpoint and the credentials, you have to just enter those details. You can check any other tutorials of my BTP studies. Right, the app is running stage, and this is the URL. If I go to BTP and if I go to dev space once again, yeah, so the human app is now available. If I just go to this app, if I access it, it basically comes to the root of the human app. So obviously I don't have any server.js file for this human app, but if I just call API as an endpoint, if I add it, what will expect? It will go to the API provider, and that is the message it's just passing, right? Quickly just validate once again with the server.js. This is what it's sending welcome to API homepage, correct? So now if I go to get data, what will happen? Let's see. So after API route, so if I just say get data, it says the forbidden. What does it mean? Because this forbidden message is coming out of this else part, because the role is missing, which is a provider scope, because the current user doesn't have this role. So if I attach this role with this user, of course, I'm able to see this message. So let's validate that part as well. So now come to this trial, and is the role collection you'll find. Go to the role collection, and this is the role collection that we have created in the security. So the name of the role collection is this. Copy this one and just filter it down, because a lot of role collections there. That's okay, but I'm interested only with this one. And it's created once we, when I deployed this API provider, that time itself it was created. So if you are just wondering how I'm able to see this, that because during the deployment of the provider app, it's already created for me. I'm just now want to add my email ID, which is my user ID for this BTP trial account. If I save it, so that means I'm just attaching my role for this user ID. So now thing is, the moment I attach, it may not work, because what will happen, because on the same session it is, so that same token, because token remains valid for a certain time. So that's the reason I want to call it something like as a incognito, or in a private window. For the box, it's a private window. So now what I'm expecting, it will ask for the login. Yeah, that's the login page. As I said, so it's a human app. So I'm just adding my user credentials. All right, the moment I'm just adding my login is done. Voila, you see, now I'm able to see the successfully reached API endpoint, which is nothing but arriving all the way from this endpoint called get data, successfully reached API endpoint. So that means we are basically able to achieve this particular use case where I have my app router outside of the project, API provider project, but I'm using the same XSUAA service. So let's go for the next use case, where I'll basically create a dedicated XSUAA service and try to access this endpoint. Let's see how it works. Fine. So now what I've done, I have just copied this particular folder called same XSUAA and just created a duplicate, but rename the folder with different XSUAA this time. All right. So now certain things we have to change, but obviously not the app router part. But to create a separate XSUAA, we need a security profile, right? So maybe we want to just create something. I would prefer to do a new file called accesssecurity.json. Okay, so it's a JSON file, right? So using that profile, we'll be creating a different XSUAA dedicated for this human app. So what to start with, the first thing is XS app name, and let's say give it a name called human XS app for human user, something like that, because we are just trying the human app to start with. So now tenant mode will be again dedicated, right? Okay, so now this thing is obviously a different security profile, which is definitely not same as we used last time with the security, right? Because it was all for the provider app only. But obviously I need to access this particular API provider out of this different XSUAA project. So that means we need to do certain things, right? Just this thing is not enough, but we have to use called foreign scope references. So this foreign scope references, it gets used only when you have this human user. Okay, and it's an array, and we have to just call it as XS app name, and then within a parenthesis we have to say this is an application, and this is the what is the XS app name for this API provider, that we can find it over here in XS security. This is the provider app, right? All right, so you put provider app, close the parenthesis. So that's why we're selling this particular application. I want to access as a foreign way, because there's a foreign scope for this application, human app, right? as a foreign scope. But what the scope that it's actually looking for is the provider scope, right? So that is a foreign scope for these applications, or .this. Okay, so that is what I want to use it as a foreign scope. All right, so now let's create a new service, XSUAA service. So let's see where am we currently. I'm in human sim XSUAA. So let's move out of this and get into what to say, human app, but this time different XSUAA. If it is within the app router, if I go to ls, and then I can find access security, which we just created, right? I think all set. So let's create a service, create Cloud Foundry, create service. CS is the short form. What type of this service is an XSUAA? The plan is application, and the name of this XSUAA instance, I have to call it an XSUAA for human. And I want to use this profile called access security .json, correct? Yep. So that is what I want to do. So if I just run it, it will create this particular service, correct? I mean instance of XSUAA. Already it's created, and this is what we just did it. So let's maximize this little, and this is what I just want to use it. But where? In the manifest, because this is a different app, and I don't want to use an XSUAA provider, but the new instance that we have just created, right? So let's save it. What will happen if I just now run this or deploy this service? Will be all set then. All right, so we have to come out of this, and we are now in this we have the manifest.yml available, and we have to change the human app name also. So we have to call it human app 2, because same name cannot exist in the same space. You have to give a different name. All good, I guess, and this is all fine. It's basically user created environment variables that we are setting up for this human app 2, which is all good. So let's save it, and what to do? We have to just deploy, right? CA push. And if everything fine, then it will be also creating a service, I mean the application rather, as human app 2, and that will be deployed to BTP. Yeah, the application human app 2 is also now deployed successfully, looks like. So if I just go to BTP and go to this spaces, and yes, the human app 2 is now available. So if I just try to access it, what will happen? I just need to ensure the login happens. But yeah, let's copy and open it in a private window, just like we did for the last time, to ensure the login happens. Yeah, so let's log in now. All right, so now it is saying not found, expected, because we don't have any root for the human app 2 dedicatedly. So let's run API so that it tries to access the API provider, but I'm getting unauthorized. By the way, I have already the role settled. What is happening there? This is happening because it's okay that I am just having a different XSUAA, and I'm telling this is my foreign scope. I want to just attach to my XSUAA, and this scope is all for this API. But this API says, hey, I don't know who are you, man. Sorry. So I cannot allow you simply. So that means this API needs to have certain communication, certain adjustment to the security profile, which will allow dedicatedly for this specific human app 2. Then only this human app will be able to access. So that part is missing. So this is what we are going to do now. So to start with, we'll go to this security profile for this API provider. So this is what the scope we have. But here we have to add one interesting thing here, and that is called granted apps. Okay. Granted apps. So this is what we want to add it, and this is applicable only for the human user application, not the client application, just to be ensured. Okay, so to add this over here, so what we can do, we have to add this access app name within application. And what is the application that I'm allowing to? It is nothing but the human app 2 application. So that means if you go to security JSON access security. This is the application access app that I'm basically allowing to, correct, to put this one, right? So this is what we are basically allowing as a granted apps for this specific scope. So what next? So let's save it. But the problem is we already have created this particular XSUAA instance and attached or bind to this API provider, right? So that is already created. As you can see over here in the manifest.yml, this is already created using this previous configuration. But now we have changed this security. So that means we need to update this configuration. Okay. So let's come out of that and go to the API provider. And if I just say ls, we have this access security, which is now the recently updated one. Now we have to update the service, and that is called cf update service. And what is the instance name? Instance name is XSUAA provider. So that is what we're going to update now. Using what? Using access security, which is just now we have updated. If I run this, what will happen? The existing API provider will now be adjusted with the newer configuration. All right, it's updating is done. So what will happen? Role is available now for this human auth, correct? And we have already set what will be the foreign scope which we are trying to access, and also we have granted apps for this specific human auth for API provider using this granted apps configuration, correct? All done. So what we are waiting for? So just we need to test it once again. So let's just copy this one. I want to close it and I want to run it again as a new private window so that it generates a new token by applying a new login credentials. So I'm just relogging and let's see what happens. Voila, now it's all, we are able to access, right? That's awesome, right? So now able to access from the human auth, just granting that application within that provider. That's what we wanted to achieve, right? A different XSUAA, but with a human user. Awesome. So 2 use cases we completed. So next move on. I know the video is a little bit lengthy, but it demands, right? So we spend some time to just understand this thoroughly. So the last one is the client app. So here we have to do a little bit of Node.js programming because we have to create our client, and we'll be creating a different XSUAA again for specifically for this application. So let's do that now. So while in building the client app, I would prefer to do everything from scratch. So let's create the folder called client app, because within that we'll be doing all our things. So let's get into the client app. So what do you want within that? We want basically package.json, and first let's create something called server.js, a file, because that will be our entry point for this client app. We'll be writing a lot of code within this file. We need certain dependency, so we need a package.json, and that's the reason I'm running npm init. So it will create a package.json file. Good. And that is what we are just running, the node server. So what we want now, we need certain dependencies to install, as I said. So it's Express. We need Axios because we need to make a certain request to this API provider, right? Endpoint directly out of this client app. So that's the reason we will be using Axios there. We'll be using SAP Access environment to get the credentials, because that credentials we need. And that's all. We don't need any access security in this case because we don't have anything to protect for client app route. So that's insufficient. So let's run, and I'm pausing the video. So all the dependencies now installed. So let's start up with the development. But before that, we needed some dedicated security profile for this client app also, because I said we should have our dedicated XSUAA. So let's create that also. So let's create some new file called access security.json. Yes, we have created. So let's add things. So first is access app name. I'm calling it as access app for client. Tenant mode as dedicated. And now, like human app, we added a foreign scope, but here for client app, that foreign scope doesn't work. We basically need to use certain like authorities, okay? And that is, I'm telling an accept granted authorities, okay? So like foreign scope, we could also wrote certain this way, like accept granted roles, okay? Just like we are doing it for authorities for the client, right? We have used certain, just to call out quickly. So we use the foreign scope with this kind of a template. We could also use similar kind of a template like called, but in that case, not authorities, but accept granted roles. Okay. All right. Right. So let's create the service now. Cloud Foundry service application XSUAA for client. access security.json. And now what will happen? It will basically create a dedicated XSUAA service for my client app. All good, right? Okay, so what we want now, we want to create certain code in the server.js. Now this will be a little tricky because we have to do a lot of things here. Express, I want to use it. Okay, I want to use let's create an app out of this express, the function. Oh, it should not be comma, sorry. So let's add a port for this application. It should be process environment.port, else certain. We will not be using 3000. It will be always from available port from BTP cloud. All right. So what we want certain credentials, right? So use XSUAA service, and that will be our. Okay, we need to grab access environment first. That I have missed. And that is a great SAP access environment. So let's call that access environment dot get service. Here I want to use, let's say, I want to use tag as, right? So this is what my XSU service. So let's get the XSU credentials. And that's all coming from XSUAA service dot my XSUAA. So that way I'll be able to get the credentials once we attach this client app with the XSUAA service that we have just created over here through CLI. Same thing, once we attach from environment variables, we'll be able to get those details because we need the client ID and client secret as well as the authentication URL. Everything we need to generate the token. So that's the reason this kind of coding is required. What next? We need Axios also, right? Because we have to make certain API call. So Axios we need. So let's run Axios. All set. Okay, so what we want, let's create one GET call, and I'm saying some route, let's say call API. So this is my route, and I want request and response. All right. So when we'll call this API, intention is I'll call my API provider URL, right? So I'm calling it like call API provider. So that is what we are interested as a function to call. Now, once we call this API provider, I'm just planning that this particular function will return a promise, so that I can just add a then function, and whatever the data that I have received out of, I'll be able to print it out over here. So that means like a response dot send, and I'll just say called API endpoint, and all right. So once I have this return resolve, means I cannot just directly call this API provider because we need a token, right? Because it's a client app, there is no such human interaction. So obviously token generation has to be done technically. So I'm calling it as like return. It will return basically a promise out of which it is doing over here. And return, I'm just saying it like fetch certain fetch token, because, or we can call it fetch chart token, right? Because that is what we are all interested. Again, I'm thinking this will return a promise. So we are yet to design it, and once we get the chart, we basically all set to use that chart and make a request call using Axios, right? So now we can make a request using Axios. So certain configurations now I have to put. So let's put something called the URL, and something we want to call it as base URL. Right? What do you want? Sorry, I just put it as JSON. Yeah. So what next? We need to put certain method, like what is happening? Method, right? We need to add a method, like what type of method you want to call or apply, because we are just making a GET call. So this is all the details we need to fill up now. So base URL is my provider app URL, which already we can access, get it from our provider app. So this is what I want to put it. And what is the data that I want to call? I want to call get data. So that is what the endpoint I am interested, right? All right. So this is what we got the data. And once we got the data, so that means this Axios will again return a promise. So we can just use something like response, and you can say like, so now we can just resolve, right? Because we got the data response, so we can just response dot data. So that is what we are going to resolve it. In case an error, what I'm doing, in case there is any error, then it's just a reject and just get that error. All right, so now the pending stuff is with this fetch dot token. So this is, we have to now design, and in the parameters, we don't need any parameter to pass, but as I said, we are handling this with the then function. That means as per the design, it should also return a promise. So let's return new promise. It will have resolve and reject. An arrow function, I'm just doing it. So what I want to do, we have to make an Axios request because we want to get the token now. But this request we have to do all by making a request to the OAuth token URL, which will get it all the way from our existing credentials. Okay, that will be using it now. All right, so let's put certain things quickly. URL would be whatever the base URL that will be getting out of this access security, whatever we have, credentials dot URL. So this is what we'll be using. We'll be using certain authentication, and we can put username sorry, each time I'm just doing wrong. XSUAA credentials dot client ID. So this is what we have to use at user ID. And let's put password. Sorry, XSUAA credentials dot client secret, that will be using as a password. All right, so now we have to add a few more setup. As params, and we have to add certain things called brand type, and that will be client credentials. Okay, we are passing this as a kind of a information, so we need to use the method as post. Okay, all good? Not yet, because we have to use the URL, and that is auth token. So whatever the credentials.url will send, with that it will be added as a concatenation and making a post call with the client ID, client secret, and the current type is a client credentials. All good. So what next? So this is my request endpoint. So now .then and response, whatever the response we receive, or maybe we can get into certain error. Oh, sorry. Correct. So if it's an error, I have to just reject with this error. But if it is successful, that means I have generated the chart token properly with the given details. And thus, this is the right time. I have to add our Axios security, that authorization header with this token details. So for that, this Axios will have things called defaults dot headers. Yeah, carefully, otherwise it will be all mess if I miss out something. So defaults dot headers common, and now we'll be adding authorization. So this is what we want to update it with bearer. Concatenate with response dot data, whatever we received, followed by access underscore token. That will basically contain the token details of the chart, and that I'm just attaching right with this one. All right, but one more thing, we are just expecting this promise. That means we have to do a resolve, otherwise it will be a problem. So resolve this same thing, response dot data dot access token. So the same thing, I'm just doing a resolve so that it is available where it is available here. The chart will be available, and then with this chart we'll be able to make a call. And this is because it will work because Axios header request already added the bearer token with this logic, right, with this concatenation. So that means all the functions are done. Correct. Call API provider, created page chart token is also done. But next we have to run this app.listen, and we have to use the support. That's all. I don't need anything else. Just save it. So my application is done, and I need to deploy it now. But for the deploying, we want to have something called manifest.yml. Also, I need to ensure that I create certain file called .gitignore, because I will be deploying this whole entered code piece to the BTP on the same repository so that you can get the code cloned. I need to suppress this unnecessary node modules, right? So from 60 all set to 24. All good. So this node model software gone. This is human app different XSUAA. You have git ignore. Here also git ignore. Just to be sure, I am attaching git ignore everywhere. Okay, all right. So now node models all out. Manifest.json, we have to just add it over here. So any of the things we can copy and we can put over here. So let's copy it to a manifest.yml and we'll change whatever we want. First thing, the application should be client app. Correct. We don't have any app router for this one. That's all right. Yeah, memory build packs are fine, but services is different, right? What is the service we created? By the way, forgot. Git. Yeah, so this is what we just created. I actually forgot that. So let's add it over here, right? So this is what we want. All right, so let's save it and we can deploy now. All right. So to deploy, what we need just put cf push and manifest applied. So let's, if everything fine, then it will be certain rounds. So routes cannot be applied, destination different space. So let's do one thing. We can put a random route. True. Okay. I think a random route only. I forgot that also. It's random route. Okay, save it. And now let's push once again. And it will be all good, I guess. Yeah, the client app is also started with this particular dynamic route that it provided. That's all. That's good. And this is also available in the BTP now. So let's run this one. What will happen? It will work. Let's see. Cannot get, because we have to call this app route. To say to access this one call API so that this particular function gets called, right? It doesn't have any route protected, but it's saying like Axios error request failed with status code 401. So something called unauthorized, right? So that means this client app is not able to access, correct, this API provider. So something similar we did with the foreign app, because this app is saying like, hey, I don't know who is this client app. So some sort of, notification or some sort of, adjustment I have to do with this API provider security profile to allow this client app also, just like we did for the human app. So let's do that in the API provider. So this is our API provider security profile. And here we have to do something else, not granted apps, but we have to use something called grant, okay, as authority to apps. So this is something we have to use for our client scenario. So it's this app name, application, but which application? Of course, go to access security, access app for client. This is what is my application that I want to allow this way, right? So grant as authority to apps will be having this one added. So let's save it. But once we save it, similar like last time, we have to adjust it. So cd API provider, we have this access security. So cf update service, again we have to update this. But what is that what is that? Our XSU instance is XSU provider minus C access security. So this is our updated one. If everything fine, now this particular provider XSU instance will be updated successfully, means we are all set. Okay, so now we are all set. So let's close it. Also, this one will not work. So let's copy once again, because we didn't change anything in the client, only the profile API provider app been adjusted, not the app, but the XSU service been adjusted. So let's run once again to this window so that it just runs a new token, and voila, you see now this we just run this call API, and we are able to see that call API endpoint and data received and successfully reached API endpoint, right? So this is what we are expected, and this is what it's working perfectly within this scenario when the client are trying to access it, this API provider. Yeah, so that was what I just wanted to create in this episode. I hope this discussion was helpful. Thanks for watching. And if you just like my channel and discussions, and you want to see this kind of similar context in future or any other SAP related topic, make sure you subscribe my channel and set the bell icon so that you don't forget or to get intimated, right? The moment I upload a new content for you. Thanks. We'll see you again soon with a different topic. Goodbye till then.